We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition. It takes a little time.
Welcome to Is It Bad for the Economy? My name is Kobe Tyree, and I'm a Democratic political media consultant trying to figure out how the Democratic Party can once again become the party of economic mobility and prosperity. And I'm doing that by asking my very well-credentialed, very successful, and very independent co-host Banker Bill to confirm for me my sneaking suspicion that Trump's economic policies are really bad for the economy. Usually, I'd say I'm only mostly successful, but today I think it's about the closest it'll ever be to a guarantee that he completely agrees with me. I hope everybody had a great Liberation Day. Today, we'll be talking about what else? Tariffs. We're recording this on April 3rd, the day after Liberation Day, and we'll be releasing it on April 9th, although I know Banker Bill is itching to get it out ASAP. Officially, this is our second episode. Thank you to everybody who listened to episode 1, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Pocket Casts. Please subscribe, star, and review the pod on your favorite platform. It's the number one way we'll be able to reach the audience we need to avoid the next manufactured recession. If we're not on your favorite platform just yet, let us know. We're trying to go up everywhere, but we're happy to move yours to the top of the list. And if you want even more Is It Bad for the Economy, join our email list at isitbadfortheeconomy.com, and we'll send you the final 2 private preview episodes on sports gambling and the cryptocurrency reserve. Banker Bill, give it to me straight. What exactly did Trump announce on Liberation Day, and what are the top line takeaways?
Broad-based tariffs. Without getting into the details, it looks like they just took imports minus exports from country A, divided that by imports from country A, and that gave you a rate. And then they go back, and there were some questions on that, and they're saying, hey, that rate that we set by country, it's tariff, it's the currency manipulation, it's a value-added tax, it's export subsidies, it's IP theft, it's counterfeiting, phony technology standards, phony agricultural standards, add it all up, you get the interest rate. So this is definitely worse than me or anybody else that I know had modeled. Definitely the worse than the worst case scenario. I suppose the only silver lining is it appears this is the max rate, barring any retaliation. We may see some retaliation, so the worst can always get worse, I suppose. And they say that the trade deficit with each of these countries is a summation of all of the, quote, cheating, and that what they have provided is a rate that they think will normalize the trade deficit with each nation.
So we've already started off on a pretty harsh foot. I think it's only going to get harsher. But I want to assure our listeners, Banker Bill and I are always happy to be wrong if it means the economic prosperity of America and hardworking Americans. I'm calling it the Is It Bad for the Economy, heaven forbid guarantee. So if we're giving this policy a chance, if we're being a little generous in our perspective, how would we define success? How would we know that the tariffs are actually working? And how long should we give them before we can actually write them off as a failure?
All right, there's a few questions there. So I think the simplest way to measure the implications are by looking at the output or GDP. I think that's probably the easiest, simplest way to measure the impact versus other matters because of the various implications. I would not necessarily look at the change in trade deficit with each of these countries, okay? So the announcement, you sum it all up, trade weighted, tariff weighted, the global effective tariff rate in the United States is now about 22%, which is the highest it's been since around 1910, okay? That's going to imply a negative hit to GDP over the following 12 months period, provided that these tariffs remain in effect, of 1.5%. What does that actually mean? That means a reduction in GDP of approximately $450 billion. If GDP falls by less than that 1.5%, it's falling less than we would expect, they're going to come out and say that that's probably a success, all right? If tariff revenue starts to overshoot, I mean, tariff revenue is looking like could be anywhere from like $200 to $350 billion. Even if that's coming in at something like $200 billion, notwithstanding subsidies that now we have to pay out for any potential retaliations, I think they're going to come out and say that's a success.
How is any GDP loss in this scenario a win for the American people?
Guys, Kobe, it's a tax. They're putting on a tariff. It's a new tax. It's a tax you didn't pay before. You put a tax on something, you're going to reduce output. Strategically, this is a long-term game. The initial upfront that we see is the cost of playing this. I suppose it's a political game, okay, a political bet, because economically, it will be very difficult to spin this as a success. There is very little history that would show, actually none that I'm aware of, and if there is, please tell me, because I'm always interested to learn, that would indicate erecting tariffs at this rate is going to be good for the home country, good for its consumer.
All right. Well, for the last time, I'll ask you to take a bit of a generous perspective and ask, how long should we give the tariffs before we can write them off as a failure?
Before you write them off as a failure? Well, I don't think that these are going to start biting until probably the end of May, because there's supply chain, right? There's already shipments in the works. There's already shipments on a ship somewhere coming through that are going to go through port of call. The tariffs still have not gone into effect yet. Look, if you want to attribute success or failure, ultimately, immediately, beyond the GDP, you could look at what is happening to prices. Are prices that you pay for things going up? Because and when does that hit? Like I said, I think it'll be around the end of May, because of, there's probably between 30 and 90 days, depending on the good, of inventory.
Bill, before we get into the X's and O's, I think we have to acknowledge that a lot of smart people, but especially you, never believed that this day would come. The thinking was that Trump's real priority was bullying trading partners into better deals, and that the real tariffs would be surgical, like they were in his first term. I think everybody, myself included, is shocked to find out that business-friendly, big number good Trump suddenly has this giant appetite for stock market decline. The last thing I want to do is turn this podcast into a competition of who's better at predicting what Trump will do next. But I do have to ask you, does this fundamentally change how you view Trump and his ability to steward the economy?
Yes. Mask off. This is 2018 trading playbook, that book that we had on him, the scouting report, let's say, if you're a sports fan, no longer good. The totally different people running the show. I mean, it was before the election, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, he had quoted, he had something, I watched him say it. He had said something like, instilling tariffs is like putting a gun to your head. Now we're just running basically word for word the Peter Navarro trade book, right? And Peter Navarro is, I don't even know that he has an actual position in an appointed position in the administration. I think he's in an advisory capacity, but we are actually matching that. And if that's the way we're going, that's a far departure from what we saw in the Trump first term. It is much more hawkish on any kind of trade whatsoever, and that potentially no trade is good trade. You saw the pullback in the market today because the market hadn't priced this in, at least not to this degree. I said this was worse than anybody had expected, right? But now we all called the bluff, and he matched. Right. So now this is what we have to deal with. This is the new paradigm from which we have to view things. I mean, people in the business, in finance and economics, in various worldwide businesses didn't think this would come to pass, that it was just campaign rhetoric, because on balance, it seems so crazy. But this is exactly what he's run on, and now he really is doing it.
But do you think it's going to work? Is this actually going to create American high-paid manufacturing jobs?
It's very difficult to say. I think the confidence has to be muted at best, because this is not law. This is all being done by executive order. Easy come, easy go. He could, at the swipe of a pen, at the signature of a pen, get rid of these things. Another president could come in and get rid of them, keep them on in some capacity. None of this is authorized by Congress and ultimately signed into law. And the fact that it isn't codified in law nonetheless gives businesses uncertainty in that whether they actually should make long-standing investments in the United States. If you were to believe that the tariffs would be in place for 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is, the long term, because now it's law, you might take and make the investment. If you think you can just wait it out, that's what you'll do.
I mean, the craziest thing about the responses to these tariffs is that, like you're saying, the outrage isn't coming from Democrats to the left. It's coming from the center right and pro-business voices. Who are the winners in all this?
Winners. Okay. U.S. trade deficit. Expect the trade deficit to come in. U.S. budget deficit, to the extent the tariffs take in more revenue than we pay out in subsidies for retaliations, the U.S. budget deficit reduces. I'm not saying that these are going to be by big numbers, okay? But nonetheless, those are winners. Other winners, firms who face foreign competition, domestic firms who face foreign competition, suppliers to domestic finished products, big losers, domestic resellers, importers and resellers or retailers of any tariff goods, export-oriented companies if there's a retaliation. So think about the American soybean producers in 2018 who were retaliated against by the Chinese, okay, where the United States government then went and paid subsidies to those farmers as a result of the retaliation. They're losers when there's tariffs. Any domestic firm that is reliant on imported inputs. So you consider a firm that makes anti-lock brake modules for a car, right? Let's say that they're doing that in North Carolina, but they import various things, circuits, the metal, the plastic from foreign companies, foreign countries. Those inputs are now going to be tariffed, even though the finished good is quote unquote an American product. Okay, so those inputs hurt. Another big loser, parents. Okay, 90% of toys are imported from China. The baby clothes, the socks, the shoes, all that imported from China.
I think the stock market is clearly agreeing with you that there appear to be far more losers in this equation than there are winners. Some people have obviously started throwing around the term manufactured recession. I made a joke about it at the top of the podcast. Do you buy this theory that this is sort of designed to cool down the economy so that we can lower interest rates? And if that is what we're trying to do here, is that worth the squeeze?
Maybe. I mean, various people in the administration, from Lutnick to Bessent to Navarro, they've all said that they want lower oil prices. They want a stable but potentially weaker U.S. dollar. And Bessent said this, he was watching the 10-year yield closely, and that they want a lower 10-year yield, so a lower 10-year interest rate. Okay. Well, since 4 o'clock, what was it, April 2nd, when they announced the tariffs to now, today, all right, crude oil fell 5%, West Texas Intermediate, United States. The U.S. dollar against a basket of currencies fell 2%. The 10-year yield fell from 4.2% to 4%. This is the first time we've seen 4% on the 10-year since October. So, I mean, manufactured recession, I don't know. Are they getting exactly what they asked for? It sounds like it.
And are those trade-offs so good for the average American worker that they're not going to mind the $2,100 to $3,800 of extra cash that's going out of their pocket in the form of essentially a sales tax?
Yeah, they're betting it is, but the economic history and, again, the case studies on tariffs would show that that's probably not what's going to happen. And that, again, this is a political exercise and, not really grounded in economic theory. Or practice. I shouldn't even say theory. Like, we've seen this. We have the cases. They put cases in front of sophomores in college about this stuff. Not to say that the Trump administration doesn't have very real grievances about the WTO. Every time we've gone to the WTO to get some relief, no matter the administration, we get screwed. We've gotten screwed. So now we've had enough.
One of the more extreme theories I've heard is that this is actually a big play to bring domestic manufacturing back to the United States, but that the first thing that has to happen for that to be possible is that American wages get taken down several pegs so that the price of labor actually makes that a profitable exercise. Do you think there's anything to that?
Yes and no. So in the immediate term, to reduce the impact of tariffs, okay, the first thing that we would look to do, and I don't know if the administration is actually doing this, is wherever we have excess capacity or spare capacity, we need to bring that online. For example, if we are importing steel and now we are going to tariff that steel, it would be very wise of us to maximize the production of our current steel capacity, to bring those plants online, to maximize the capacity of existing plants in order to offset the potential effect from tariffs by way of higher prices. If we repatriate this manufacturing, fine. You got to tell me what it is. But ultimately, we need to do things better. So that means we need to do it at least as fast with better quality or the same quality, or we have to do it maybe slower, but with better quality, or just as fast with better quality. Other alternatives, which, maybe more likely or not, but I'll give them to you anyway, is you can increase manufacturing without hurting wages if the end consumer is willing to pay more and higher price. So if it's true that an American consumer will be willing to pay more for a product to know that it's manufactured in the United States, which means higher input labor costs, that's a way that you wouldn't have to reduce the wages of the worker, okay, because the end consumer is paying more. Another way is if American companies, right, they take a hit to their profit margins, right? And so they absorb some of the effects of a higher wage, right, while keeping their prices to the end consumer the same. I'll give a brief anecdote specifically about Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes-Benz manufactures the baby Benz models. I think it's the CLA, maybe the A-Class, popular cars for the American market that get people into their first Mercedes. Now, those cars are manufactured in Hungary, where their workers paid around like 25 euros an hour. Now, there's been debate in Germany for years before this happened about repatriating that production back to Germany. But the problem is the German worker there is making like 50 euros an hour, something like that, much higher wages. And Mercedes-Benz is saying we can't make it work. So Mercedes makes the car over in Hungary, ships it over to the United States, and sells it to the end consumer. What we're now asking is that they take that production that they're making over there and bring it to the United States. Now, the wages of the UAW worker are much closer to those of the German auto worker than they are the Hungarian or Austrian. Okay, so the likelihood that Mercedes would do that is low. Why would they? In fact, they may stop production of that vehicle in total, or stop exporting it to the US, or try to export it to other countries, right? Because now the tariff that's been put on it makes it unaffordable for the exact customer they were targeting. Moreover, the Mercedes-Benz doing this to get you into that entry-level vehicle is ultimately to get you to buy a better vehicle, hopefully from Mercedes-Benz, down the road. These are vehicles that actually are manufactured or assembled in the United States. Maybe not as much as the administration wants, but say 30, 40% of the parts of that vehicle, along with the final assembly, are in the United States. So now you may be taking away in full potential revenue that you otherwise would have seen down the road by instilling these tariffs today and forcing that consumer into another product.
What's cool about this is that Mercedes has figured out a way to take the pros and cons of Hungary's cheap labor costs, our higher labor costs, and Germany's even higher labor costs to integrate it into their business model and to create this lifelong customer journey where you graduate through their quality tiers and Americans get great paying jobs by being able to insert themselves into the middle of it. But that's only the kind of thing you can do when there's stability across global markets and people like Trump aren't doing the unthinkable, the unpredictable.
Yes, I think you have it exactly right.
It's really hard to wrap my mind around this. I just can't understand what he's doing. It's hard to wrap my mind around not only the scale of these tariffs, but the seeming randomness of it. I think that this country has demonstrated an unbelievable ability to sacrifice and to unite in times of incredible hardship. In World War II, national disasters, the Great Depression. We have so many examples of this in our history. I know right now it feels like they're ancient history, but we've done it before. This just seems so manufactured. It seems so completely artificial. It's like Trump is like an economic hipster who's just trying to bring 19th century policies back.
Well, I don't know that it's a crisis just yet. Maybe it'll get there. It's definitely 19th century tactics for sure. And these are tactics that I suppose he's been espousing at least since maybe the 1970s and early 1980s. What can I say? He talks a lot about cars, and there's always talk about, United States can't sell cars in Japan and it's unfair. Here's the thing. Japan's national market for cars is like 4 million cars a year. The American market is 17 million cars a year. If you opened up You just crack that knuckle open and you allowed every American manufacturer to go in there and compete and sell as many Japanese cars as they could. You still actually wouldn't solve the problem that he's supposedly trying to solve because the markets aren't the same. You have one market that's much bigger than the other. It's a fallacy in economics. They're chasing a ghost, but this isn't about. I don't think it's about economics. It's about politics. And you're the politics guy, so you got to tell me.
Well, I think the hope is, and I don't want to get too optimistic, but the hope is that Trump's ability to keep Republicans in line is a lot weaker today than it was a week ago, than it was 2 weeks ago. And that's because of the special elections on Tuesday. Obviously, Democrats are feeling a little emboldened by the special elections in Florida, where Democrats went from losing elections by 30 points to losing by 15 points. They still didn't come close, but that's a lot of ground to cover. The big race, though, was in Wisconsin, where Musk really staked his reputation and his money on his chosen candidate winning the Supreme Court race there. And the thing is, we talk a lot about money in politics. There's good money and bad money in politics. If people know who you are, if people don't like you and they know that you're supporting a candidate, all of a sudden your $50 million, your $100 million don't go nearly as far as grassroots raised $50 million or as some anonymous donors as $50 million. And, Republicans understand that better than anybody. They tainted George Soros's reputation. And now George Soros is one of those people where if he spends money in a race, it's not going to go as far as if you and I donated that money. And Elon Musk's money has been a really important component for Trump to keep Republicans in line after they suffered the L on Gates and the early budget fights before Trump even came into office. I think they took those L's understanding that Gates was despicable and weak and they probably shouldn't hang their head on him anyway, but they couldn't allow that to happen anymore. Musk started going around saying, if you oppose Trump on a quote unquote key vote, I'm going to drop I'm going to drop $100 million on whoever your primary opponent is. That was really scary. But now that we know that Elon Musk's $50 million aren't as good as some other Republican donors' $50 million, do Republicans, start to listen to their pro-business base? Do Republicans start to listen to those folks who really care about the stock market and their donor base and their grassroots voting base, and they say, maybe I want to get on Fox News tonight by scoring some points against Trump. Maybe I want to get some on Fox News tonight by scoring some votes for a specific business, a specific factory in my district. We've got a long way to go before that happens, but I think those cracks are a lot wider today than they were last week. And so I hope that some of this stuff that we've seen of Republican senators join Democratic senators in the Senate to rebuke Trump on this stuff continues to gain momentum and continues to put some guardrails on what ultimately tariff power is, a power that the legislature has delegated to the president.
I don't. They're going to give him wide latitude, I think.
There is this theory that Trump has a much bigger tolerance for stock market decline this time around than he did the last time, because now the majority of stock owners are actually voting Democrat. With Stellantis already announcing 900 layoffs the day after the tariffs were imposed, I can't imagine that the stock market decline is the disease and not the symptom here. I think that if there are mass layoffs, this so undermines Trump's entire brand, his entire identity, that Republicans are going to stop looking at how can I get a better seat at a better table at Mar-a-Lago, and they're going to start thinking about how they can position themselves to win the 2028 Republican primaries.
Don't you think that folks are already doing that? Right? Because Trump is a lame duck.
I think that right now Republicans are scared of even questioning whether Trump is going to run
I
in
agree
2028.
with that. You can tell.
I think it's ridiculous to think that Trump has the chance to run in 2028. I think that would require historic levels of juice to either change the Constitution or get the entire country to ignore the Constitution and allow him to run for a third term, no matter what loophole he tries to invent, which is going to be complete nonsense. But he doesn't have that. He didn't have that juice 3 weeks ago. He didn't have that juice after Signalgate, and he certainly doesn't have that juice today. So all of a sudden, the 2028 primary becomes a much stronger, present, looming reality for Republican senators than it was a couple of weeks ago when they were worried about how can I get Trump to retweet me.
Sure, that's reasonable.
Bill, I know you're a big fan of Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who's surging in the polls there largely in response to Trump's posturing. It's very funny. Trump is all of a sudden a big fan of Carney because he suddenly realized just how much his ire was helping Trudeau's party in the polls. But I know I don't want to get your opinion of Carney as a politician. Neither of us are qualified to speak on Canadian politics, but I do want to get your opinion on Carney as a banker. I know that you're a big admirer of his game.
That's right. I mean, I've known about Carney since I was, much younger. When he was with the Bank of England, he was with the Bank of Canada, a couple of things. So Bank of Canada, led them through the financial crisis. Bank of England led them through Brexit. The guy seems pretty measured. He's kind of, maybe not cut from the same cloth, but for people who don't know, he's similar in terms of temperament and the way he approaches things as, say, Jay Powell is. Seems very center of the pack. People in the United States, they're going to rail on him for ESG or sustainability, this, that, and the other thing. I'm just saying that in terms of the global perspective, he's really not that out of line as he may be painted to be by certain people of the American media. This is a guy who's very shrewd. He has the right connections globally. He knows his way around international finance, treasury, central banking. And I believe that he will have the gumption and the chops to be able to end around certain aspects of what I see as a 19th century trade policy in ways that we may not yet see.
Obviously, the rest of the world is trying to figure out how to respond right now. They've had years to come up with a game plan. Certain countries look like they're going to play hardball. Certain countries are looking like they're going to wait it out. The most notable examples are Europe. Currently, France is talking a big game about coming after America hard, but we'll see what they do. China, Japan, and South Korea say that they're on the same page in terms of responding to the United States.
The statement that they released, it was a couple pages long. I read through it. It was a nothing burger, basically said nothing. But the fact that you got all three of them to issue a communique, that's kind of telling to me. That's not necessarily a good thing. You got the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Koreans to get together and issue a statement against you. I don't know about that.
Well, we'll see how they respond in the coming weeks, and we'll be sure to talk about it more. But I want to end on this note. What does this mean for our listeners? You were saying that they should expect to start feeling this in May, that we have a little bit of lead time. What are you doing right now to protect yourself from these tariffs moving forward?
I guess a couple things. So the parts on my car are going to be or would be probably hit by tariffs, no matter where they come from, right? Whether I get Chinese parts, Mexican parts, German parts. So I'm probably going to bring my car in for a checkup, and anything that needs to get done, I'm probably going to get done in advance of potentially higher repair bills. I'm expecting my produce to go up at least until the summer, at which point American produce kind of takes market share away from the Southern produce because the American produce is now come to harvest. And then it's monitoring spending carefully, seeing what happens at the grocery store, and keeping a close eye on the consumer spending I have and how it affects ultimately my household P&L, right? Just like anybody else. My base case is that to the extent these tariffs day by day remain in effect, we are going to see impacts. They are much too high to not see an impact. This is beyond the 25% broad-based tariff. This is beyond the 10% broad-based tariff because the effective rate is 22%, and it's focused in particular in certain countries like China, Mexico, Canada, where we get a majority of our goods from.
We can say that President Biden was better for the economy than President Trump was, right?
Ask me in 6 months.
Well, I think today, for once, I'm going to be able to end the podcast by saying definitively that Trump's policies are bad for the economy, at least in the short term. And unfortunately, things are looking so dire that I'm not enjoying being able to say that nearly as much as I hoped I would when I first started this podcast. This is scary, folks. We don't really know why we're doing this, and we don't know where the bottom is. But we'll be keeping a close eye on it. We'll be keeping in close touch with Banker Bill to make sure that we're not completely losing our cool over all of this, or if we are, that it's an informed loss of cooling. And we'll be telling you all about it in 2 weeks on the next episode of Is It Bad for the Economy? Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being one of our very first listeners.